And to discuss Whitey Bulger's death and the state of the mob today, we're joined by Michael Franzese. Michael is in Las Vegas. He was a New York mobster in the 1980s with the notorious Colombo crime family, which at one point was the biggest earner the mob had seen since Al Capone, until he decided to walk away and leave his life of crime. Michael Franzese, welcome to the Newsmakers. Why do you think Whitey Bulger was killed?
Well, honestly, I think it was a mistake by the Bureau of Prisons. Normally when you go in and you have a jacket like Whitey's, I mean, he was a known informant, highly publicized. You have separations. You're not supposed to be put around anybody that could possibly cause you harm. And sometimes the Bureau of Prisons make mistakes, and they put him in the wrong place. They put him in population. And there were some people out there that obviously knew of his reputation. They were from Massachusetts, where he was from. And I really believe it was a mistake because it happened to me when I was in prison. They brought a separation of mine into prison, somebody that was in the witness protection program, and by mistake they put him in general population. And it could have been pretty bad for him too. But he was fortunate; he was able to get out of it.
So you think it was a killing by fellow prisoners who didn't like the fact that he was an FBI informant, rather than a designated hit instructed from the outside?
Well, the word was out on Whitey that if anybody were to see him, I mean, that word was out for the last 20 years. I knew that when I was part of the life. I knew the people from Massachusetts. One of them in particular, Jerry Angulo, had instructed me. He said, look, if we ever see this guy or find this guy, it's basically shoot to kill on the spot. So everybody knew that. It was no secret. And I believe when they put him in that prison, the guys from Massachusetts knew exactly who he was. And from what I understand, the fellow that admitted to it was an associate of the mob, and, he did his duty.
Why do you think he became an informant for the Bureau?
Who knows? I mean, look, when I was in the Colombo family, we had people around us that we thought were loyal, and we learned later on that they were informing with the FBI for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, it was very scary when you find these things out, about somebody that you're standing next to and discussing things and doing things with for so many years. But, who knows? I mean, sometimes they do it for themselves. I believe with Whitey, he wanted to take control of his area, and he didn't like the Italian guys, no doubt about that. And it was a trade-off. He was given information on the Italian mob, and he was allowed to run free pretty much out there. So that's the game that some of these guys play, and unfortunately, it normally ends up bad.
Michael, what did the criminal world used to say about Whitey Bulger? He was found guilty of 11 murders, but when he was out, when he was operating and people were talking about him, was his criminality more notorious than that of others? What was his reputation?
No, I mean, look, as far as my associates, nobody liked him. We didn't have high regard for him at all. He did his thing. He normally didn't interfere with any of us. We don't, he just wasn't well liked, and he wasn't well regarded, and, stay out of our hair and we'll leave you alone. But obviously he crossed the line in many ways.
Let's look at the mob as it is today. How much has organized crime changed since you were involved, since Whitey Bulger was involved? Is it the same as it was before?
I always say the golden years of the mob in the United States was really from, the 50s right through to the mid-80s. And during that time, we had a tremendous amount of control. I mean, we controlled the unions. And in America, if you control the major unions, in a way, you control the country. And we had a tremendous amount of power there with the Teamsters and, the dock workers and security unions. I mean, I controlled a security union that had guards around nuclear power plants. So we had a tremendous amount of control then. And, we had infiltrated, really American society from the White House right down to the man on the street with the numbers business and everything in between. So we had a tremendous amount of control. That really started to end in the mid-80s. When I have to give Rudy Giuliani credit for this, because he started using the RICO Act very effectively. It was a very difficult law for us to defend, and a lot of us got caught off guard with it. And it really started to end for us in the mid-80s. That's when they put all the bosses away. That's when I went away. A lot of my fellow associates, fell under that RICO. And a lot of guys started becoming informants because years ago, prior to that, if you got a 10-year sentence, 15-year sentence, really no big deal. You do some time, you get parole later on, you come out and you resume business. But when RICO came in, it was a whole different thing. They were giving guys 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. Guys don't stand up under that kind of time. And it really started to create a lot of informants. The FBI started to win. And, it won't go away in my lifetime. I mean, it's still operating, certainly in New York. The five families still do exist, but they don't have the same power base as they did once before. But I always say these guys are very resourceful. They're not going to go away in my lifetime, and it'll continue on.
And do you think organized crime influences American politics?
Oh, I know for a fact it did. I mean,
I
had many connections.
Does it do it now, Michael?
Now? Not as much today. No, I mean, it's different. But look, there's a certain way that the Italian mob, La Cosa Nostra in our country operates that we just got a way around about us, and people want to be around us, and that goes for politicians also. We supported a lot of them with major fundraisers, a lot of money. We had union money behind them. And as long as those opportunities exist, we'll have influence in politics. And, I get asked about Donald Trump all the time. Donald Trump was a major builder, obviously, in New York. And back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, you couldn't build in New York unless you dealt with the unions. I don't care who you were. So he had to deal with us at times. There was no question about that. But that doesn't mean that he was a close associate. We didn't control Donald Trump or anything like that. And I can say that for a fact. I met him on 2 or 3 occasions with Roy Cohn, very famous attorney back then. So obviously he dealt with us, but we didn't control him. But that's not true of all politicians. There were many that we did control.
So you live a very different life now. How did you get out of the system? How easy was it to get out?
It wasn't easy at all. I mean, you don't walk away from that life, without entering a witness protection program or going into hiding. But, I was very fortunate. I mean, I knew that life very well. You got to understand, I was a capo regime or a captain, so I understood the life on a high level. And, I moved away from the guys. I changed my entire lifestyle. I had 7 or 8 years of a pretty rough time. Plus, in prison, they kept me locked down quite a bit. So it was a rough struggle for about 10 to 12 years for me. But honestly, without getting into detail, I just outlasted everybody. I mean, everybody I know, and I mean everybody, is either dead or in prison for the rest of their lives. So, I was very fortunate. I was able to make the break. And, I don't take anything for granted. I'm careful when I go to certain places because I know I should be. But so far, it's worked out. And, it's been 20 years for me now. So, I think I have a good run on the outside.
Just briefly and finally, Michael, you say that the word was out on Whitey Bulger for 20 years, so he would have been looking over his shoulder every minute of every day, presumably. Is that what it's like for you?
No, and let me tell you, with Whitey, we lived in the same neighborhood in Santa Monica. We walked the same streets that he eventually got arrested on. And I probably bumped into him because that's where I lived, but I didn't recognize him at the time, and I wasn't looking. Maybe if I was looking, I might have recognized him. But then we lived there for probably 10 years together. We shared the same neighborhood. But no, it's not the same for me. I mean, I don't look over my shoulder. I don't think anybody's out there actively looking for me. I mean, I'm a public speaker. They can find me. It's not that difficult. But again, I don't take it for granted. With me, I believe it's like anybody else. If somebody wants to make a name for themselves and they're at an event that I'm at, or they see me walking the street, they make a phone call, back to New York, and who knows what could happen. But I don't worry about it because you can't live your life like that. I don't thumb my nose in anybody's face, but I certainly don't live in fear.
Michael, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Appreciate it.